We're here at the 6 o'clock hour, and we're here for the path for racial equity, the Aftershow. And today I'm actually going to be your host. My name is Dr. Kazike Prince. I'm the interim executive director for the Central Texas Collective for Racial Equity. And we are actually our fourth show in a series, a six-part series, focusing on different topics. Today's topic is on economic justice, and I've actually asked my friends to be a part of this conversation. And I'm actually just going to kind of step off. My role today is to be your host, but also to monitor the chat and Q&A. And what I'm going to do is actually introduce Preston James, who is the executive director of DivInc, which is a very powerful local group here doing some really wonderful things, really being a champion for women and people of color running businesses in this area, being entrepreneurs. And so I invited him to be the moderator for our conversation around economic justice. And so I'm just going to hand it over to you, Preston. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And it's a great pleasure to be here, part of the Aftershow, part of the series of talking about, the path to racial equity. And I got to say thank you to the great Dr. Kazike Prince for just being a strong leader in the community and really driving this conversation and going beyond conversation to really kind of drive collaboration, which is important to really, effectively move the needle where we all want to go. With that said, I'm super excited to be here this evening with Pamela Benson Owens and also Mr. Mike Nellis, two extraordinary leaders in the Austin community. And we're going to talk about, economic justice. And so with that said, I want to welcome Pamela and Mike. Good evening. And, we want to go ahead and give you, quick, second to introduce yourselves. So just high level, what you do. I mean, most people should have, read your LinkedIn profile or what have you. But real quick, Mike, talk about, the Austin Community Foundation, what you do, and then Pamela talk about Six Square, which people definitely need to know about as well. So let me start off with ladies first, which is always appropriate to do. So Pamela, let me open it up with you and tell us a little bit about yourself, Six Square, and then I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you. Pamela Benson Owens, the Executive Director of Six Square, Austin's Black Cultural Arts District. If you've not heard of us, you have now, and so look us up, and we are firmly planted at the intersection of preservation and heritage and development of the Black community, specifically in the 6 square miles of East Austin, but beyond as well. Been in Austin for a long time, excited that I get to be on this panel with two leaders that I really respect and have had a chance to work with. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation this evening.
Awesome. Mike?
Thanks, Preston. Good evening. I'm Mike Nellis, and I'm the CEO of the Austin Community Foundation. And I'm glad to be with you all. And thanks to Dr. Prince for inviting me to be part of this panel. The Community Foundation is a 40-year-old organization here in Central Texas. We are a charitable foundation, and our mission is to close the opportunity gap in the region. We are a quickly growing foundation here with the growth of Austin, and we're really focused on changing in the ways that Austin is changing right now, with a focus on equity. And so I've been in Austin I'm not a native Austinite, I'm so sorry, but I have been here for about 20 years and I love it, and it's my home, and I'm raising my kids here, and so grateful to be with you all tonight.
Okay, good to have you. And then we were joined by the one and only, Rudy Metayer has joined us. And so Rudy, just in time for the intros, my man. So can you just high level talk to us about what you're doing at the Texas Black Caucus Foundation and what you're doing in Pflugerville?
Well, I'm glad I'm able to join. It's always good seeing you, Preston. And Pam, you're absolutely phenomenal. Mike, I love the work you're doing here. I'll be blunt. I am literally left my city council meeting to come here, and it's because of KP. When KP asks, you come. I support anything that KP does, period. End story with that. For me, I mean, it's actually quite time we're even talking about this. I just left, we were talking about some economic development goals and ideas that are happening on the Eastern Crescent, on the east side of 35, and the significant phenomenal development that's happening there, and that has benefited cities like Pflugerville, cities like Manor, which you're seeing at your Hutto, which you'll see in Taylor up and down that area right there, as well as the traditional Eastern Crescent of Austin as well. You're going to see some rapid changes along 130, to be blunt with you, which I think, again, to be blunt with you, should be opportunities for hub businesses. And you're gonna, being literally the most diverse city in Central Texas, which is what Pflugerville is, and having an in-city population of almost 80,000, about another 45 in the ETJ, so about 125,000, 130,000 people out here. It's been shocking to see the transition that this old, let's be blunt, old white German town has happened to turn into what it is today. And a lot of the issues that you would see in other areas when you see that kind of change hasn't existed in Pflugerville. I mean, one of the things that we just did recently was that we did a study regarding issues that are important to our citizens. And the number one thing that came back from our citizens, and they were shocked when they did the study over and over again, was equity. So that tells you where our city is and where our values are as a city, as a community with that as well. As regarding the Texas Black Caucus Foundation, I've been honestly blessed and honored to go ahead and help shepherd and lead this organization. What's happened is that we've looked at issues and concerns that the Black Caucus has been advocating for decades, and we were trying to figure out what better way to be able to have them execute legislation that would actually reflect the issues and concerns that, honestly, Black Texans, it lifts up all Texans in general. When we start looking at workforce development, when we start looking at, regarding economic means concerning healthcare, when you start looking at the digital inclusion and the lack thereof, not only in the rural areas, but also, in urban areas as well. When you start looking at, civil rights, George Floyd Act, and issues like that. And frankly, even when you look at redistricting, and people not understanding the significance that redistricting comes into play in your own relationship with things. Those are issues that the Black Caucus Foundation is championing and working with. And what's been great is we've been able to partner with organizations like the organization we are with tonight, the LBJ School, partnering with Texas 2036, the United Way, looking at organizations across the board who are looking, as Mike said, they're looking at through an equity lens, Bank of America and other things regarding what to do and how to get things done. It's been pretty astounding. I've been humbled to say the least regarding this relationship.
Awesome. So thank you for that, Rudy, and I'm glad you were able to make it this evening. Of course, this is going to be better than any city council meeting you're going to be in. So, we're just going to make it like that. So let me just kind of kick off. We're talking about economic justice. How do you define economic justice? What is economic justice, and why is it, important? Why does it even matter, right? Because for a lot of people, I think they think everything is fine, right? Go get yours. Go get yours. I got mine. But what is economic justice? I mean, you guys want to start off, Pam? You want to start off with us?
Sure. I love that question. And the reason why I love that question is because we talk about it a lot at Six Square. And we realize in the last couple of years, certainly, that we talk about it all the time, but not everybody else is talking about it all the time. And so there's a lack of education. So we've spent this last year educating and inviting people to realize that prosperity and justice go hand in hand. That is, you have to put those things in context and together when you're talking about how do we co-create a more fair and equitable community. And so when we're sitting in these meetings and it's this narrative around, everybody has an equal chance here, and to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and then you're like, hey, surprise, not everybody has bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody has boots. it's been fascinating to me to go, man, we clearly need to step back. And what I've been excited about at Six Square is we could have been like, you know what, you figure that out yourself. Which is certainly a strategy. Instead, my language all the time is let's educate and invite people to understand why prosperity, right, and justice go hand in hand. And so that's been the approach that we've taken. Some days it feels like a literal beat down. You're like, oh my gosh, not again. But you have to lean in and meet people where they are. And we are now past the phase where we feel like we have to persuade, convince, and change. We are just speaking from the context of it is. You're either getting in the minivan with us to move it or you're not. So we're really at that phase, and we're being really intentional and deliberate about how we deliver that message, how we partner, how we define collaboration, how we reset ourselves to be in an abundance mentality instead of a scarcity mentality. So we're doing that culture building work around like, how do we talk about this? How do we talk about this in a way that doesn't shut people down? Oh, we're gonna let them feel that a little bit because there's a gap, right? An assumption made. So we've been doing that work intentionally around our programming and teletown halls, Black Minds Matter events where we've asked people to come in so we can have these conversations. We certainly do not promise safe space, but we do promise that we're gonna allow brave space. And so for us, that's where we've been going, and it's a slow, long road, but we keep inviting people into the minivan. We will stop for some road trip snacks. We will let you get out and stretch, but we will ride together.
Thank you. And I love I love that you called out the fact that, prosperity and injustice go hand in hand. And I think we'll end up talking more about that. Mike, what's your take on economic justice and why does it even matter? What's your perspective on that?
My take is I should be quiet and just let Pam talk some more. Like she's got this down. Now, I mean, I think at the Community Foundation, we think about this at kind of a community level, and really we're looking at a community in which economic power is more. It's more evenly balanced. Economic gain is more equitably distributed across a community. Ownership, control, decision-making is more equitably shared across a region. For me personally, wealth, and when I say wealth, I think about sort of economic security. I don't mean sort of big wealth. I'm talking about just being able to pay your bills and live a high quality life. So wealth really isn't and shouldn't be considered a zero-sum concept. We all do better when we all do better financially. And so, for me, why this is important is because 52% of Black and brown households in Central Texas live in what's called liquid asset poverty, which means they can't withstand a shock to their financial system that would put them out of work for 3 months. It would be catastrophe for them. And that just is not acceptable in a community. And so we need to do better.
Thank you. Rudy? Rudy's looking for a book. He's going for a book.
Is it? Do I have it on here? Oh, okay. One of my kids took it. Okay. So I'm giving a reading assignment. Oh, no, there it is. Color of Law. Okay. So I'm not going to go on a soapbox, but I will say something. I think that Pam is exactly right when she says that. I think as a country, I mean, some people are coming kicking and screaming, make no mistake. But as a country, when we are talking about things like systemic racism, these are not just crazy left-wing ideas that these people are making up where people are trying to understand it. And I encourage anybody who is still wondering, what are they talking about? What are these issues? I mean, Preston put it best, about, what we're talking about right here, because it's been systemic where we're at today. People don't know places like Levittown. They don't understand the idea and the concepts that back in, and that's only 1947. So when you're talking about, hey, wait a minute. Oh, well, why are these people pulling themselves by their own bootstraps? Just like what this man right said, no one pulled themselves by their own bootstraps. Someone along the way bent themselves down and helped someone give them a helping hand to where they're at. It's true. And the issue is, what are we trying to understand why we need to go ahead and, as Mike put it, put more of an emphasis point on helping Black and brown people because of what's happened before. If the biggest transfer of generational wealth in our country is based on owning your own house, and you weren't able to buy a house in these suburbs, in these areas, and not because you couldn't afford it, but because you were Black, that's an issue. Because how are you going to be able to transfer that wealth to your kids, to your grandkids, and everything else from there as well? That was stopped, and that was done because of the law. It's one of the reasons why you've got to I give this Texas Supreme Court a lot of credit, Justice Guzman in particular, talking about how the law, lawyers, we have a specific obligation when it comes to equity and justice in this country because of the things that we've done in the past to stop Black and brown folks from being able to go ahead and advance and move forward from these things. These things didn't just happen in a bubble. I'm not telling you, I try to explain to people, when we're talking about systemic racism, we're not saying someone's got a mustache twirling and I'm screwing Black and brown people. No, we're talking about, hey, listen, how did these systems get in play in the first place that even to this day in 2021 are disproportionately affecting people? Okay, Councilman Rudy, I'll tell you a perfect example, the vaccine rollout. So I get the map late December, I think 29th or 30th about the map, and I see that the vaccine rollout is happening, the majority of it, with only a couple little dots on the west side of 35. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? We know for a fact Black and brown people are disproportionately being affected by COVID-19, that 40% of all Black-owned businesses are coming back because of COVID-19, that we're seeing these percentages that these folks need to help over here, but this is what's happening over here? Well, guess what? Because of what's happening at the state level, who they had partnered with, where they partnered with pharmacies, which makes sense, pharmacies, doctors' offices, et cetera, to go ahead and get things done. And hey, we want to roll this out as quickly as possible. These are partners we've had in the past. We're going to do that. We're going to utilize them. They thought, hey, no problem. What they didn't realize, wait a minute. What if I live in a food desert and there is no HEB? There's not going to be a pharmacy over there as well. Wait a minute. Okay, what if I go ahead and I don't have healthcare in my specific areas? How am I going to go ahead and approach that? How am I going to get the vaccine to whatever as well? And they didn't realize disproportionately, because of the system that was in place, why that occurred. And why, when you talk about systemic racism, that's what we're talking about. Systems in place that made that happen. We're talking about economic injustice. It's not that Black and brown people didn't want to aspire or didn't try to aspire, or didn't try to go in and get these things, or just lazy, as some people want to go ahead and characterize it as well. It's that, hey, listen, the systems in place did not allow for us to happen, and that's why we need to readdress these issues. Yeah,
and all the things that you called out, Rudy, I mean, to me, what's been frustrating is, when folks don't want to acknowledge that there are these systemic policies or laws or things that are being done intentionally or unintentionally, but the unintentionality of it is the fact that, well, this is the policy, this is the law, this is what it is, and so therefore I'm just following the policy and the law. But when you follow the policy and the law that happens to be biased because it was created at a time, and so you are not part of the solution, right? You're actually perpetrating the injustice when you deny certain people access, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's housing, home ownership, whether it's business loans or whatever. All this, and I think my takeaway is that this injustice, intentional, some people get bent out of shape. Well, it's not racist if it's not, intentional. Look, you are, we're discriminating against people, right? Based on policy, law, unintentional happening. And it's happening every day. And that impact there's a social and there's an economic impact as a result of those actions. And if we don't acknowledge that there are policies and laws in place, to your point, Rudy, only back in 1947, right? But there's some of them, I mean, you talk about what happened on the East Side, that was 1928, you know? And so the access to economic opportunities is not equitable. It's not equal as a result of all these things that are happening. And it's sad, and I'm just gonna throw this out there, and it's sad to run into somebody who is, 21, 22, 23 years old, and they're telling you in 2021 or 2020 that they are a first generation college student in 2020, right? So what does that mean for their family? Like, you mean to tell me in 2020, this is the first person out of a whole multi-generation of people that has the opportunity to go to college, right? There's something wrong with that, right? So, okay, so let's go into, I think we kind of hit this, the barriers to economic justice, right? We called them out, there's some policies, there's some laws, there's individual biases that are happening. So, and I'm gonna leave this up to you guys a little bit. Are there additional barriers that we need to know about? Definitely call those out. But then I'm gonna kind of jump over a little bit and say, okay, we identify these barriers. What do we need to do to push through those barriers and create greater access to economic justice? So if there are any other barriers I didn't call out, please feel free to call them out. And then what needs to be done to get over those barriers? So let me start with, Mike, I'm gonna start with you on this one.
Sure. I think you've clearly identified the barriers, racism and institutional racism. That is the sort of underpinning of this. And really, I love the nonprofit sector. I'm a nonprofit guy. I've spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector. I'm a big believer in philanthropy. I love community philanthropy. It's a great thing. And it is also a terribly flawed thing as well. Philanthropy is a symptom of a terribly flawed system. It is the system that has created racial and economic injustice, which has led to philanthropy and led to the nonprofit sector. So I think that in the philanthropic space, which is my space, we need philanthropy to be supporting organizations that are led by Black and brown people, embedded in those communities, who know their communities best, who know those solutions best. We need to be supporting institutions that are working at that kind of individual level, right? And I think that is incredibly important. And no amount of financial literacy coaching will solve the overarching systemic problem. That just will not work. And so while we need to be continuing to do kind of that individual-based support, philanthropy also needs to be doing something that it doesn't like to do, which is to work on policy. And it is something that our institution struggles with. Every other foundation, generally speaking, struggles with. The nonprofit sector as a whole struggles with it. That is where I think we can make more systemic change. So we need to be thinking like working on things like livable wage, breaking systems that keep people in a cycle of poverty, like predatory lending, reforming bail policies, things like that, which really break systems and cycles. I think other things to think about are things like the child care subsidy, which is so low that it keeps wages for workers low, but it also makes child care inaccessible to many. And so those underpinnings of economic security and economic justice are the things that we need to be focused on in this region. But additionally, so those are some important things that philanthropy can do. But the big pieces that I think that we miss often is how to align our grant making and our investable capital. We give away a lot of money every year, and one of the things that we should be thinking about also is how do we take that portfolio of ours and others that have much larger portfolios and invest capital as equity or debt with Black small businesses and entrepreneurs, brown small businesses and entrepreneurs. There is, talk about systemic racism. Access to capital is a huge issue for small business owners. And this is a place where foundations can really make a big difference. One of the things that the Community Foundation has done is we've taken our entire fixed asset portfolio and are using it to provide concessionary lending to Black and brown owned small businesses, folks that typically would have been blocked from traditional capital. And so those are the tools that I think that foundations and charitable organizations can use in addition to typical grant making to create conditions for economic justice.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Mike. And I agree, just quick highlight. I don't know the specific data points in the grant, making, grant giving world, but what I've seen, running a nonprofit is I would imagine the numbers in grant giving may not be a whole lot different than what I see in the venture capital space in terms of distribution of dollars. I'm thinking it's better. In the venture capital, Black and brown entrepreneurs get less than 2% of the hundreds of billions of dollars that are given in investment capital. And I'm hoping that the grant making world is not as bad as inequitable, right, in the grant making space, but it may not be that much better. And so there's a lot of room, to your point, for better collaboration, better support, better structure. And I know ACF is definitely, busting down some doors to sort of move in that direction, which is awesome. Still awesome to see.
Well,
Rudy, I'm going to come to you and ask you the same. I mean, how do we break them down? You're on the city council. You've done law. You've seen everything in the law side. The Texas Black Caucus Foundation. What barriers do we need to be tearing down, man? In addition to what Mike is saying, or in support of what Mike is saying, what do you see we need to be breaking down?
I think Mike, I think you crystallized, especially to access the capital, because you find the business plans, Mike, for these small businesses, Black and brown businesses, they're not shakier than their white compatriots. They're just not. When you look at the bones and bones of the plans, it's just, let's be blunt. Who do you know? And how do they trust? And what they're going if there's well? And another further with that, who's in the room making a decision on these things? Because if you're not having that viewpoint or idea actually involved in a decision on these things, well, guess what? More likely than not, it's going to go to the wayside. I mean, I think all of us have been, Preston, Pam, KP, myself, we've been in rooms where we're the only ones. And we've seen how big of a difference it makes when we speak up and say, hey, have you thought about this? Or talk to someone about this? Because, these are things you need to consider. Or, by the way, I know somebody who does. I can't tell you how many people are shocked when I refer them to a Black friend of mine who does oil and gas law, or a Hispanic friend of mine who does wills and estates and probates. And they're like, wow, I can't believe these people out there. I'm like, they are out there. It's just, it's what is your perception? What is your viewpoint? Who are you associating yourself with? And and to be fair to these people, even in the Austin area, I graduated from Texas law. And this is one of the top law schools literally in the country. And it is still a struggle to get these major law firms to get Black and brown and Asian attorneys into these firms. And so we had to, luckily you have phenomenal local judges like Judge Laura Livingston, Judge Eric Shepard and folks who helped create the diversity fellowship program that we're a part of, where we actually take 1L students, first year law school students who they're usually first generation. I know, Preston, I know. That's tough, but yeah, I mean, they're usually first generation students themselves, and they may not have the best grades, but we look at them, we look at their writing systems, we're like, okay, how about this? What if we spend first half of the summer with local judges, either at the state, federal, or appellate level, and the second half of the summer with these major law firms? And what we've seen is that once people have seen these students, once these students have been put in these environments and they see the work of these students, they start to look, wow, wait a minute, maybe when you start looking further out, and these people exist, and they got in hired. What's great is that the program's become a success to the point where, it's a very highly sought program over at the law school with it as well. But it was started out, how do we increase that pipeline? What do we work for that? I'll tell you that, if we're talking about the Black Caucus Foundation, the Black Caucus in general, Senator West and Senator Boris Miles have repeatedly said and working on bill and legislation regarding hub businesses. Because I'll be charitable and I'll say that they're not necessarily utilized at the level they need to be utilized in the state of Texas by entities that are required by law to utilize them. I'll leave it at that. And how do we, for a better lack of term, get these folks, kick them in the rear and say, no, we have this list of hub businesses. You're going to let them know about these things. You're going to let them know about these RFQs, these RFPs, because a lot of times they just don't know, Preston. They're not aware of it.
Exactly right. Yeah.
They don't know there's opportunity for that. And to Mike, what you were talking about childcare, I'll even kick it further with help with postpartum care when you're doing regarding these women when you're for healthcare reasons. Wait, okay, so people are on Medicaid and you're only putting them allowed for the mother to be on Medicaid for another 3 months? Wait a minute, why isn't this at least 12 months? Why isn't this 18 months? Because if they're not able to go ahead and take care of themselves physically, they're not gonna be able to take care of their kids. And in turn, they're not gonna be able to work. And if they're not gonna be able to work, they're not gonna be able to take care of their kids and they're gonna have to cycle of property and everything else.
Yeah.
And it's like they're not looking farther down the pipe. And that's when I will say what makes the Black Caucus Foundation so unique is that we have pastors involved, a lot of evangelical pastors involved in what we're doing, who have seen that there needs to be true seismic systemic changes done across over here. And let's be honest, the evangelical community has not really been a part of this whole racial justice movement for a long time. So it's phenomenal to see them involved with this. And they're on tip of the spear with trying to get things like the refunding of the Center for the Elimination for Disproportionate Disparities, because they see these issues and they're saying, okay, we need to change this at a systemic level. How do we go ahead and approach these things? Because we see in our own pews, when we're speaking on the pulpits on Sundays, these are issues that involve right there as well. And they may go ahead and we're doing this for Black Texans, but it will raise all Texans. Workforce development, all these other things. How are we training? How are we retraining? That's another thing. Let's be honest, especially post-COVID. How are we retraining people to make sure they have the skill sets made available? We have Tesla, we have Amazon, all these other people coming over here as well. What are we doing to make sure they have the skill sets for these jobs to make them with that as well?
Well, it's interesting that you said that. I got off a call earlier today, and there's this, innovator, tech innovator who's focused on human enablement. How do you empower people through innovation? He told me that research says that 65% of the jobs that are coming up online, right, are going to be jobs that don't exist today. 65% of the jobs that our kids, if you have children, are going to be getting do not exist today. And so how do you train people for jobs that don't exist? So it's a different mindset education on how we have to prepare people, for the future. So let me thank you. I mean, we can go on with that. Pam, do you want to add to that in terms of what you see, or you want to take us? Well, let me ask you this: why don't you take us to what can people do, right? People want to get in, they've had this awakening, right, in 2020. And, I'm sure we all have worked in organizations where what I've seen a lot of nonprofits do, or, people who mean well, right, with their money and their investment, but where they invest their time and where they invest their money is at the symptom level and not at the root level, right? And so, if they wonder why the needle doesn't move, on poverty or some of the education, I just feel like, and I don't know, I want you to share your opinion as well, that's because we're not hitting at the core, right? And at the core, you have kind of a lot of things going on, right? We're talking about, systemic racism and the opportunities and the access to those opportunities and resources in education. So if we're not tackling it at that level, then we're missing the mark. We're just scratching the surface, right? And people go away feeling good that they did their thing for the year, but what can we do better, more effectively going forward from your perspective, Pam?
That's a huge question, and it always comes up. And what I would say is, to the point of my colleagues on this call who have really given really specific things around capital and dismantling systems, I think one of the things that we have not just named in the space here in Austin is that we have a really big issue. You've now read Color of Law because Rudy told you to. You swung over to White Fragility and picked that up. Now you're reading Caste. Thank you so much. We're excited. But hold on to your Birkenstocks, because here is the part that we don't talk about, which is in a town where we have what I would consider to be do-gooder syndrome, a lot of nonprofits, do-gooder syndrome. Many are confusing justice and charity, and it's killing us.
Woo! Wow.
Justice,
say it again.
Justice is a way of being. Charity is a transactional action. We have conflated the two, and that's why we cannot get we cannot get where we need to go in terms of really moving the needle. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Mike Nellis because I haven't known him forever, but I will say to you that Mike Nellis has gotten fatigued by his own privilege and has gone after it hardcore. And so for me, the concern is, Pam, what can I do? I appreciate you reading all of those books. We have a do-gooder syndrome hangover in this city. And we have confused that with justice. And it's why we get to the end of the year and we're still sitting here and people are shocked when Rudy says, let me show you the map for the vaccine. So when we do that, it's because we are uncomfortable now because it has been unearthed. And so if I am a person of privilege, I think I'm moving it forward, but really what I'm doing is I'm going to, with good packaging, defend fiercely my comfort, for sure, and my goodness. Because we associate naming that we might have some bias as that we're not good people. And we need to separate that out and say we are conditioned and exposed this way. And so that's how we've behaved our way and perpetuated the very systems that Rudy has spoken about and Mike has spoken about. So when I sit in meetings and I hear you give me your list of books that you've read, my next question always is, and how has that altered, adjusted, or changed your behavior? Because what I usually get is I give you both data and anecdotal experience, and you counter me with theory and a need to defend your goodness. So until we unpack that we confuse justice and charity in this city, we will keep repeating it. And we all know very clearly, if you're a leader in the city, you will repeat what you don't repair fully. We keep cleaning out the wound a little bit, but there's still bacteria in there. It'll heal, but it's also gonna be puffy. So when I think about like Mike in the game, Mike is literally cleaning out the wound. I'm not even sure how popular he is right now. I love him, but it's not a popular position. But it is necessary if we're going to actually dismantle and co-create an equitable community, period.
Woo! Okay.
Oh, man.
Good job, sister. In this Sunday worship that we're getting so far from Rudy and Pam. Mike, hard act to follow, my man. But I'm giving you the pulpit, Mike. You're in a very unique position, and as the head of the Austin Community Foundation, and Pam just basically kind of called out something pretty big, and you're in the trenches with this, as a white male, right? I mean, this is not a very comfortable place, I'm sure, for you, but you're trying to shift create this paradigm shift. Tell us what you're seeing and where we need to go.
I think for white folks in this community and white leaders, one of the things that they need to do is to listen, read all the books you want, right? But listen and learn from people who have been doing this work a lot longer than you have, and who have been experiencing institutional racism and flat out racism directly their entire lives. They know what the problems are, and generally they know what the solutions are. And so one of the things that we've tried to do, and I have tried to do, is to take as sort of I lead our organization forward, take a half step back and ensure that Black and Brown voices are at the table, make sure that they're well represented, make sure that the decision making of sort of how capital is deployed from the Community Foundation is being led by people who represent those communities that you're trying to support, and also have a lived experience. It's our community as a whole, but it is their community that they are trying to create solutions for. And so those are the things that I think we have implemented here over the last handful of years at the foundation. We have, I will admit, we've not always gotten it right, but we continue to push forward and break a bunch of glass. And I think Pam's probably right. I'm not always the most popular guy, but I think trying to clean out that wound and that sort of history that we have as a collective community is important.
Yeah, definitely. And to Pam's point too, I do appreciate, the push and the drive and the change that you're trying to create. I think all of us on the panel will say that we all have to be part of that change. We all have to be part, be at the table, and we have to lead. But this is a collaborative effort that has to happen, no doubt, right? I'm not going to sit here and say, Black people by themselves will solve Black people's problems. We know the answer. We probably know all the answers, or a lot of the answers, right? But we can use some support. We can use some help. Likewise, I think folks, white folks on the other side, I think they can use some help too in better understanding what they don't know, right? So I think, we don't know what we don't know, right? I don't know what resources may be available to me. You might say, hey, there are different tools and mechanisms where we can get money and funding. I may not know about them. And the Black community may not know about them. But together, it's like we can actually do this, right? If we just go together, right? And stop fighting, each other, or trying to deny, things that are there because you don't see it and you don't live it. But so anyway,
one thing about that, Preston, which was really interesting, and then I'll be quiet, is we were doing some work with our team here at the foundation with Dr. Prince, and someone said, well, should we be getting, white people's perspective on this work? And his answer was, yes, they're part of this. They are part of this, and we need to be engaging them in this solution as well. You can't just sort of push them off to the side. They have to be engaged.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. All right, so I see Kazika is back on the screen. So that means, our time is coming to a halt. Kazika, doctor, tell me what I need to do. What you need to do next?
Well, it's kind of like church when the deacon starts standing up, the minister needs to slow down a little bit. And then when the organ player starts playing, I don't have an organ, so I'm just standing up. But I wanted to open it up for our Q&A from our audience and encourage them, if they haven't already, to share their questions with our panelists here. This has been a very powerful discussion around economic justice. And I want to get to the very first question. And this question I'll start with, it says, besides the fact that the system to get vaccines is all online, and Black, Latino, and elderly people have less access, how do we actually make those changes now? Why are they not selecting pharmacies in low-income areas? Anyone want to get on that one?
It's a great, I'll be blunt, because those pharmacies aren't there. I mean, literally, that's the issue. And it's the reason why, for example, Councilmember Metayer in Pflugerville. And this is where, Stephanie Hayden, talking about sisters, talking about people who are in positions. And that's another thing. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this, particularly being an elected official. Run for these positions. Be in these positions. Make sure the people that represent you represent your values. They don't have to be Black or brown. I'm not going to say that, but they should be representing your values. And just like Mike, being a good ally, strong ally like Mike is, that's what you need. Because you need people who are decision makers. People don't pay attention. The biggest government that affects you on a day-to-day basis is your school board and your city council. Those two things affect you for your roads, your infrastructure, to what your kids are learning, what are they eating, everything else up there as well. They affect you the most on a day-to-day basis. Those two. So run for these positions with there. But to answer that question, it's a great question. They don't exist. So, I know that in Pflugerville, we've been blessed by just our tremendous growth to be able to have some of these things over here with that, with that. But what we're doing is that we're utilizing our rec center. We're using we are dealing with an unorthodox, non-traditional virus. We have to use unorthodox means to combat it. And we're sitting there to vaccinate people. We're setting up things at churches. We're setting up places over, at schools, because guess what? These schools in these areas, fire departments, guess what? They're in these specific areas. You've got to be in the communities where people live to go ahead and get the vaccination to the people who need it. Now, I'll also be real with you about this. We are having an issue with people that look like me because of the history of science in this country. I can't blame them for that. Not wanting to be a part of and working on these specific issues. And they don't want to get the vaccinated. So it's incumbent on people, leaders like ourselves on here, to have that conversation saying, hey, listen, we've got to use all the tool sets made available to make sure that, yes, vaccination, I understand your apprehension and concerns with science, but we need to get vaccinated. We want to get back, not to where we were, but to get better. Because remember, it wasn't all good for everybody when we were right before the pandemic. We want to get better. Where part of the tools we have to use in the tool sets is to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and I'll add something to that really quick, because the vaccinations are an excellent example. But this same methodology also applies to access to financial capital, right? Because banks are not in some of these neighborhoods. So, part of the issue with PPP is that a lot of the small business owners did not have relationships with banks. Well, the banks don't exist in their neighborhoods, right? And so now you're in a catch-22, right? So financial banks, and then also if you look at, healthcare, we're in a lot of the healthcare facilities. There's a lack of them in some of those neighborhoods. And then you look at also, food access, right? Because you have food deserts in a lot of the grocery stores don't exist, right? And so, all these things are not by mistake. They're not by mistake. And so we've got to do better together. Again, it's to identify and say, okay, we need to put these resources in place strategically in these communities so we can actually have better outreach and better connections and better serve these communities and remove these barriers, if you will, to access to the opportunities in education, healthcare, home ownership, et cetera, et cetera.
Excellent. Anyone else want to get on that before we move to the next question?
I just wanted to say you can play that scenario out that Preston said for a variety of things. Childcare, not accessible. I got to take 3 buses to drop off my kid across town and then try to get back at work. Like you can apply a lot of economic frameworks to what was just said. It's not just food. It's not just healthcare. It's not just it's childcare. It's access, to simple things that people I think take for granted. Like I have a child and they have a science project due. I've got to get the supplies. It's not in my neighborhood. All of that, those circles start to, become such a challenge. Then it's oppressive. And then after a while, you internalize it and you act it out. And so there's a whole other mechanism at play from that example that Preston gave.
And if I could just say, Ed, I think part of the reason why the collective even exists, one of the conversations that happened 3 or 4 years ago was this idea of having a community school model that looks for schools, healthcare, wealth, dealing with the wealth gap. How do you get all those minds together, working together to create the systems in place to deal with the very things we're talking about, so people don't have to travel, an hour or 2 just to get to their doctor's appointment and then get their kid back to school? Why don't you put those 2 things right next to each other so you can actually make it happen more? And how do you make that happen? But the systems aren't set up to work with one another. And so there's been a lot of discussion here locally about how do we do that more effectively. But the biggest thing that gets in the way is how do we pay for it? So if you don't mind, I'm gonna get to another question with the time that we have. It says, I continue to hear talk about how racism is systemic, blah, 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 but no action from whites. Here we are in 2021 and nothing. I want to know what actions white and white adjacent folks are doing consistently to be anti-racist, leverage their privilege, sponsor Black and Indigenous folks, etc. Just tired of attending these talks, which are important, but month after month, year after year, I'm seeing and hearing everything from the whites who claim they are doing the work. The work is demonstrated in their behavior and actions, which is non-existent. Not too much of a question there, but I wanted to put that to see if anyone wanted to react to that.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I've got it. That's a long question, and I'm not sure that I can represent every white person out there. But what I can say is that I think Pam made a good point, which is a lot of white folks don't want to be uncomfortable and don't want to be engaged in this conversation. I think the work that you started, Kazike, was a good one, was good about courageous conversations. That work that you started in this community was really, really important. And that is a great starting point, but agreed, it takes more work and to be anti-racist. And you've got to, frankly, from the Community Foundation's perspective, we are trying to put our money where our mouth is, and deploy resources in that will support and empower Black and Brown communities.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I understand your frustration completely, but I will also say this: there are a number of whites who are stepping up to the plate, and they're getting engaged. They're putting their money and their time behind the effort. At the same time, they're trying to learn, right? Some of them are willing to be uncomfortable and get into it, right? Yes, we want to see more, no doubt about it. We want to see more whites getting in. But I will say, in Austin, we have seen a number of people step up and get behind certain efforts. Not always getting it 100% right, but they're in the grind, right? They're trying to make a difference. Is it perfect? By no stretch. We have a long way to go, and we have a lot more people to get into it. We need people in leadership levels to really tear down policies and laws that have long been existed, and they have to be brave to do that, right? I mean, you see it in DC every day, the stupidity that's going on when people decide not to step up and do what's right, right? And that's all this is. It's like, do what's right. You know, we can make comparisons between, oh, if so-and-so said what so-and-so did, you know, on January 6th, he would have been in jail already, right? And y'all know who I'm talking about. So we need people to step up and be brave. And it is being uncomfortable. And I know as a Black person, you're like, okay, white people being uncomfortable, so what? We've been uncomfortable for as long as we've been on this live on this earth, right? For multiple generations. So come be uncomfortable with us, and so we can go do this together, right? I mean, you're uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable, so what? Let's go do it. And that's when we go to get things done.
Love that, love that. I'm gonna go to one more. Oh, I'm sorry, Pam, you wanna get in there?
I just want to say, because I hear the intensity of that statement, and I want to just add that it is okay to lean in and feel all the feels. My concern and my irritation is we have to keep coming to these conversations. We need to keep having them until we don't have to have them anymore. And when we start deciding that we're not going to get it because we're waiting for people to get it, the time to fix the narrative and the time to help it along is not to be out on the outside of the conversation. We've all done, I see these, we do a lot of panels on this. We need to keep coming into the ring and being willing to have the conversation while it moves. And we also need to, it's not about just like accommodating or making white people feel comfortable, but I do think it's important in the spaces that we feel and see that moving, that we acknowledge it. I acknowledge it. It's like, man, Mike, look, I was on a meeting one day, I was like, Mike Nellis is handing out fairness like Skittles over there. I don't know what's happening. We need to get behind it and have other people model it. And so I think we also have to, just because you are supporting uplift and moving in the right direction does not mean you are ignorant to the fact that we have a long way to go. But when you get outside the minivan and start becoming an internal assassin to the bigger piece, it's not helpful. So feel the feels, but don't disengage.
That's right.
Man, that's a really, Pam, that's a really strong point with that, is that, I remember Mama Burt. So those who come from UT, Mrs. Burt, Brenda Burt too well, we call her Mama Burt. And one of the things that she told us early on on campus in the 40 acres was that it's not just enough for us to graduate from UT. We have a special obligation to make sure that we're pulling up people behind us and helping to influence changes over there with that. And I always thought to myself, I'm being real here. I was like, man, how unfair is that? Man, how are these other people, my white compatriots, they're just going to school here and these kids go and do that, take care of their families, go off and do everything like that. Why is it my responsibility? And the older I get and the more I get involved in everything that's happening, I see that it's not going to happen if we aren't involved. It's not going to happen if we aren't on the roads. It's not going to happen if we're not in the van, instead of, as you said, Pam, being a sniper on the outside of the van. We've got to be there because we're the ones who are going to truly make these changes that we want happen with her and push these people, make people feel uncomfortable, make people understand our viewpoints and ideas and get things done. And, it's a special burden that we as the people have carried on, just like you said, for generations, eons, Preston. And I think that's what makes our people strong and special with that. And I also think that it gives us a unique perspective and opportunity to make the changes that we need to today.
Well, Preston, I just want to say, one, thank you for leading this really powerful discussion about economic justice. We covered a lot of different topics. We were able to respond to some of the questions and statements from our audience. I do want to remind our audience that we actually are recording this webinar. We'll be sharing it over the next day or so folks can have access to this beautiful, really God-given genius that's been kind of given us today, and really encouraging you to be part of this conversation, because part of the challenge is that there is a lot of talk. I think the concern is that how does this talk lead to action? But if you're not talking, you're not going to be taking much action, and it's oftentimes not going to be well informed. And so I want to continue this conversation. I want to, hopefully, as we've talked about before, that this is not the end of the conversation, it's a continuation of the conversation. And so I would encourage you to join us at the Central Texas Collective for Racial Equity to hear more of this and share it with your friends. If you want to support what we're doing over at the collective, I've shared the link to our website. You can donate and be part of the Beloved Community campaign, because we're really trying to make some really meaningful change here in the Central Texas region around dismantling racial equity. And so I want to invite you to be part of that mission, that movement. And again, I want to thank Preston James, who was our moderator. We also have Mike Nellis from Austin Community Foundation. We also have Pam Owens, who has been a friend and is just been a wonderful person to know and be part of 6 Square and what she's doing over there, reminding us that charity is not the same thing as justice. And then my friend Rudy. Brother, tell me how to say your last name, because every time I look at it, Hooked on Phonics don't work for me. Say it for me, brother.
Well, you know what was funny? I heard Preston about to say it the right way, the French way, Metayer, and then he switched it to Metayer. We live in Texas, so it's Metayer. But Metayer.
I'm gonna do it the French way. I got a little French in me too. So Metayer, my brother. Yes. And he comes to us.
You know us Haitians. You know us Haitians, KB.
That's right. That's right. And he comes to us from the Texas Black Caucus Foundation. Just glad to have everyone here. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you and appreciation for each of you and everything that you're doing here in the community. And thanks. Take care, y'all, and have a good night.